Come on, we're almost there.
I know, dear. Stay with me, I've got you.
Through the door.
She was nobody. That was what they said about her. A girl with holes in her shoes and kindness in her chest, the kind of person the city swallowed whole without blinking. But the night she stopped to help a frail old woman lost in the rain, everything she thought she understood about her life shattered like glass on marble. Because the woman she helped wasn't just anyone, and the man who came looking for her afterward wasn't just any man. He was Lorenzo Ricci. And once Lorenzo Ricci looked at you, truly looked at you, there was no going back from it. Not for him, not for you, not for anyone standing between you. Welcome to Mafia Home Tale, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The rain started just after 9. Sophia Caldwell pulled her jacket tighter and kept her head down as she crossed the wet street, her grocery bags banging against her knees. She worked double shifts at the diner on 5th, lived in a studio apartment that cost more than she made, and sent money home to her mother in Ohio every month without fail. She didn't have extra. She didn't have cushion. What she had was a good heart that refused to mind its own business, and that heart was the reason she stopped. The old woman was standing at the corner of Marchetti Avenue, completely still, a small leather handbag clutched in both hands, her silver hair plastered flat against her cheeks by the rain. She was dressed in what looked like good clothes, a cream blouse, pressed trousers, low heels that were soaked through. But she was staring at the street like she had forgotten how to cross it. Sophia stopped walking. She looked around. The foot traffic pushed past the woman without a second glance, umbrellas and shoulders and wet coattails. Nobody slowed. Nobody looked. Sophia set her grocery bags down on the curb and approached. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you all right?" The woman turned, and her eyes were the warmest dark brown Sophia had ever seen. Intelligent eyes. A little frightened, but trying not to show it. "I was going to meet my son," the woman said. "I think I turned the wrong way." Sophia looked up and down the block. There was no car, no driver, no one waiting. Just rain and strangers and a woman in her 70s standing alone in the dark. "Do you know where you were headed? Which restaurant?" The woman frowned. "He always takes me to that one with the roses in the window. La Rosa, you know it." Sophia did know it. It was 4 blocks away and 3 tax brackets above anything she would ever walk into on her own. She picked up her grocery bags. "I'll walk you there," she said. The woman looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise, more like recognition. Like she had been watching for this exact kind of person and was relieved one still existed. Her name was Adriana. They walked slowly, Sophia adjusting her pace, her umbrella tilted to cover them both. Adriana talked the entire time. She talked about the city, about how it had changed, about the roses her late husband used to grow in their garden outside Milan. She asked Sophia about herself with the particular directness of someone who had earned the right to be curious. Sophia answered honestly. The diner, the apartment, Ohio, her mother's back surgery that wasn't covered by insurance. Adriana listened the way people rarely listened, with her whole face, like every word mattered. When they reached La Rosa, light poured through the arched windows, warm and golden against the wet street. A man in a dark jacket came through the door before they even reached the steps, his voice clipped and urgent into a phone before he spotted Adriana and froze. "Signora Ricci, thank God." Adriana waved a dismissive hand. "I'm perfectly fine. This girl brought me. Sophia, she's wonderful." The man lowered his phone and looked at Sophia with an expression she couldn't quite name. Relief and something sharper underneath. "Please," he said, "come inside." Sophia shook her head. "I'm glad she's safe. You have a good night." She meant it. She turned to go, bags bumping her knees again, rain still falling, and she thought that was the end of it. She was very wrong. The next morning, Sophia was on the early shift when the black car pulled up outside the diner. She noticed it because nothing that sleek had ever parked on this particular block. It sat there for a moment, engine still running, and then the door opened. The man who stepped out stopped the breath in Sophia's chest. He was tall, dark hair, pushed back. A jaw that looked like it had been designed to be photographed in low light, all hard angles and expensive restraint. He wore a gray suit that must have cost more than 3 months of her rent, and he moved across the sidewalk with the kind of unhurried authority that made people step aside without being asked. He walked straight into the diner. He looked around the room for exactly 1 second before his eyes landed on her. Dark eyes, the color of deep water, steady and still and somehow already certain. Like he had already found what he came for and was simply confirming it. Sophia felt something happen in her chest that she had no name for and absolutely no interest in examining. She grabbed her notepad. "Can I help you?" The man looked at the counter, at her apron, at the notepad, and something moved across his expression that wasn't quite a smile. It was more contained than that, more careful. "My name is Lorenzo Ricci," he said. His voice was low. The accent was there, elegant and controlled beneath the English, like a river you could hear but not see. "You helped my mother last night." Sophia blinked, the woman in the rain. "She was very kind," Sophia said carefully. "I just walked her to the restaurant." Lorenzo held her gaze. "You got her out of the rain. You walked 4 blocks. You refused to come inside and you asked for nothing." He said it like these were unusual things. Like he had spent a long time in the world of people who always wanted something and had forgotten that anyone could exist outside of it. Sophia shifted her weight. She looked like she needed help. It wasn't complicated. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and placed an envelope on the counter. "For your time," he said. Sophia looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. "That's not necessary." His expression shifted. "Take it." She picked up the envelope and pushed it back across the counter toward him. "I didn't help her for money." Lorenzo looked at the envelope. He looked at her. Something in his jaw changed, a slight tightening like he was recalibrating. He picked up the envelope slowly and put it back in his pocket. Then he said, very quietly, "Is there anything you need?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not entitled, not transactional, something else, something that felt almost careful. She looked at him. "I'm fine, thank you." He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he gave a single nod, turned, and walked back out to the car. Sophia stood behind the counter with her notepad still in her hand and told herself very firmly that her heart was not doing anything strange. It was definitely doing something strange. 3 days later, Sophia arrived at work to find a new coffee machine behind the counter. Industrial grade. The kind that cost several $1,000s and produced espresso that tasted like something from a European cafe. Her manager, Paul, was standing next to it with the expression of a man who had been asked no questions and told to simply receive a delivery. "Where did this come from?" Sophia asked. "Anonymous," Paul said, with the careful tone of someone who suspected it wasn't anonymous at all, but had decided not to dig. Sophia looked at the machine for a long moment. She thought about the dark suit and the steady eyes and the way Lorenzo Ricci had looked at her across the counter like he was solving something. She thought about that for longer than was probably wise. The following week, 2 things happened. The first was that her mother called to say the hospital had received a full payment for the back surgery. No explanation, no name, just a wire transfer that cleared the balance entirely and a note from the billing department that said, "Covered in full." Sophia sat on her apartment floor with her phone against her chest and stared at the ceiling. She knew. She knew the way you know something when it costs you nothing to figure out, but the knowledge itself costs you everything. Because now she couldn't pretend it was coincidence. Lorenzo Ricci had paid for her mother's surgery. She didn't know whether to be furious or something dangerously close to the opposite. She chose furious. It was safer. The second thing that happened was that he came back to the diner. This time he sat down. He took the stool at the far end of the counter, the one the morning regulars saved for people who wanted to be left alone, and he ordered black coffee. And he didn't bring an assistant or a driver or anyone. He looked, for a brief and startling moment, like an ordinary person who had wandered in from a difficult day. Sophia walked over with the coffee and set it down harder than was strictly professional. You paid for my mother's surgery, she said. He wrapped both hands around the mug. He didn't confirm or deny it. He just said, "How is she?" Sophia stared at him. You can't do things like that. He looked up. It's done. You don't even know me. Something changed in his expression. Dark and very direct. I know enough. Sophia planted both hands on the counter. That's not how this works. You can't just walk into someone's life and decide things for them. I'm not something to be bought. I'm not a problem to be solved. I helped your mother because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted anything from you or your family. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. He turned the mug in a slow circle. Then he said, I know you weren't expecting anything. That's why I did it. Sophia blinked. He held her gaze. The people who help because they want something in return, I can handle those. I understand those. He paused. You were different. She didn't know what to say to that. She stood there in her diner apron with a coffee pot in her hand and felt the words land somewhere she wasn't prepared for them. She straightened up. Don't do anything else, she said. He looked at her. He said quietly, all right. He drank his coffee. He left a tip that was reasonable, not extravagant. He walked out. Sophia watched him go and thought that the most dangerous thing about Lorenzo Ricci was not the suit or the car or the power that clung to him like something physical. It was the way he listened. A few days later, she found out who he actually was. One of the line cooks mentioned the Ricci name in passing, talking about something he'd heard on the news, a business deal, a property acquisition. Then he said the other thing, low and matter-of-fact, the way people said things in this city when they assumed everyone already knew. They say the Ricci family has been in the city since before the mayor was born. Old money, old connections, the kind of old that doesn't show up on records. Sophia looked up from the table she was clearing. Say that again. The cook shrugged. Lorenzo Ricci. Don't you know who that is? His family runs half the construction contracts in this city, and the other half of what they run doesn't exactly make the papers. She felt the cold travel slowly down her spine. She went home that night and sat with it. A man like that, a family like that, and his mother wandering in the rain because a driver hadn't shown up, because plans had fallen through, because even people surrounded by power were still just people in the rain sometimes. She thought about Adriana's warm eyes, her voice when she talked about the roses in Milan. She thought about Lorenzo's face when he'd said, "You were different." She made herself stop, thinking about his face. She was not entirely successful. The following Saturday, Sophia's shift ended at 3, and she walked home through the market district, because the fruit vendor on Callie's Street always gave her a fair price, and she liked the noise of the stalls, the voices in 4 languages, the smell of bread and coffee and something frying. She was squeezing a peach and debating its merit when she heard her name. She turned. Lorenzo was standing at the edge of the stall, out of place in the market crowd the way a private jet was out of place in a parking lot, and yet somehow not quite as out of place as he should have been. He had a jacket on, but no tie. His sleeves were pushed up. He looked like a man who had made a decision to be somewhere without calculating it first. Sophia stared at him. Are you following me? No, he said. Then why are you here? He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the stall, at the fruit, at her hands. Then he said, my mother wants to meet you. Sophia lowered the peach. She wants to what? Meet you, properly. She talked about you every day this week. He said it with something in his voice that was not quite complaint and not quite admiration, and was probably some combination of both. She wants to cook for you. Sophia laughed. It came out before she could stop it. A real one startled out of her. Lorenzo looked at her when she laughed. He looked at her the way you look at something you were not prepared for and don't have words to account for yet. She stopped laughing. She looked back at him. The moment stretched longer than was comfortable and shorter than she wanted. I'm not coming to dinner, she said finally. He accepted this. He didn't push. He nodded the way he had nodded in the diner, single and measured. Then he said, she'll be disappointed. That's manipulation, Sophia said. The corner of his mouth moved, very slightly. Yes, he agreed. She looked at him. She felt, with absolute clarity and absolute helplessness, that she was losing something she had not yet decided she wanted to win. Fine, she said, one dinner. The look on his face was brief, but she caught it before he could put the controlled expression back in place. Something that looked a great deal like relief. Something that looked, underneath the relief, like something she was not prepared to name. She turned back to the fruit stall. She bought the peach. She walked home with her heart, doing the thing she had told it very sternly not to do. The dinner was on a Thursday evening. Lorenzo sent a car. Of course he did. It arrived at 6:45, black and quiet, with a driver who said nothing and drove like he had taken a vow of invisibility. Sophia wore the nicest dress she owned, a deep green wrap dress she had bought on clearance 2 years ago and kept for occasions she told herself would eventually arrive. She told herself this counted. She told herself this was nothing. She was going to have dinner with an old woman who had been kind to her in the rain. That was all. The Ricci house was not what she expected, which was part of the problem, because she had walked in expecting marble and cold, and had found instead a house that smelled like garlic and fresh bread, and had a lemon tree in a clay pot by the kitchen door. Adriana met her in the entrance hall with both hands and a look of such genuine warmth that Sophia felt the defensive layer she had been carefully constructing all week soften around the edges. You came, Adriana said, like this was the best news she had received in a long time. She looked older without the rain, smaller, more beautiful. She also looked, in the particular way that mothers look at things they have decided about, completely and entirely satisfied. Lorenzo appeared from a hallway. He was in dark trousers and a white shirt, no jacket, no tie, and he looked different in his mother's house. Still large, still the particular gravity of him that filled a room without trying, but the sharp edges had softened by half a degree. He looked at Sophia in the green dress, and the soft edges sharpened back up again, quickly and entirely, and she pretended she had not noticed. She noticed. Dinner was loud and warm and completely overwhelming in the best possible way. Adriana cooked the way she talked, with total confidence and no half measures. Pasta that tasted like something handed down through generations, bread that was still warm from the oven, wine that was very good and poured generously. She asked Sophia questions all through the meal, about her life, her family, her plans, not invasive questions, curious ones, the kind that assumed Sophia's life was worth being curious about. Lorenzo ate and said less than his mother, but he watched. He thought he was subtle about it. He was not subtle. Every time Sophia said something that made his mother laugh, his expression changed. Every time Sophia reached for her wine glass, his eyes moved before she did. She caught him twice, and he held the look both times, steady, unashamed. It should have made her uncomfortable. It made her feel something that was not uncomfortable at all. After dinner, Adriana declared she was tired and retired to the sitting room with the practiced elegance of someone making a deliberate exit. Sophia helped clear the table. Lorenzo appeared beside her at the sink. They were quiet for a moment. You didn't have to do that, he said. Do what? He took the plate from her hands, the thing with the dishes. She looked at the plate. I was being helpful. You were, he agreed. He was standing very close. This kitchen was not small, and somehow they were standing very close. Your mother is wonderful, Sophia said. She is, he said. She's rarely wrong about people. Sophia looked at him. He was already looking at her. What does that mean? He was quiet for a moment, choosing words the way he seemed to choose everything, with deliberate care. It means she told me the morning after I brought her home that the girl in the rain was someone I should meet, he said, before I had said anything to her about you. Sophia felt the warmth of the kitchen around her, and the warmth of something else, something that had been building for 3 weeks, and that she had been refusing to acknowledge with the particular stubbornness of someone who knows they are losing a battle and has decided not to admit it yet. I should go, she said. Lorenzo didn't move. He didn't reach for her. He didn't close the distance. He just looked at her with those dark, steady eyes and said, very quietly, "You don't have to." She stood there for a long moment. Then she said, "I know." And she went. But she thought about that kitchen all the way home, the warmth of it, the lemon tree by the door, the way his voice had sounded when it had no armor left in it. She thought about it for a long time after. The week after the dinner, things at the diner began to feel different. Not in ways Sophia could name easily, more like the difference between knowing someone is in the building and knowing they are in the room. A presence, an awareness. He came back on Tuesday. Same stool, black coffee. He had a newspaper this time, folded in his left hand, though she noticed he didn't open it once. He sat for 40 minutes, and when he left he said, "My mother wanted me to tell you she's making panzanella this weekend, and if you're free she would consider it a personal favor." Sophia dried a glass very carefully. "This is your mother inviting me, or you?" His jaw moved. He said both. She came back on Saturday. This became a thing that happened. Not every week, not by any pattern she could name, but regularly enough that Adriana started setting a place for her without asking. Regularly enough that Sophia learned the layout of the Ricci kitchen and where the good olive oil was kept, and that Lorenzo took his coffee without sugar but always stirred it twice anyway. Small things, devastating things. He never pushed. He never demanded. He showed up in her life like a man who understood that trust was a thing you built one quiet action at a time, and he seemed to have made a private decision to build it correctly regardless of how long it took. He started appearing in places that were plausible but not coincidental. The farmer's market the following week because he claimed he had business in the district. The bookshop on Mercer Street because he had heard they had a good history section. Each time slightly closer. Each time a little more of the armor gone. She was not fooled. She was also not complaining. Then came the night with Marco. Marco Ferrante was a regular at the diner. Late 30s, sales job, one of those men who sat at the counter every morning and considered himself charming. He had been trying to ask Sophia out for the better part of a year with the consistent good humor of someone who assumed the no would eventually become a yes if he was patient enough. She was used to Marco. He was harmless, annoying in the particularly cheerful way of someone who didn't register signals, but harmless. That Thursday, Lorenzo was in the diner. He came in without announcement, took the stool, ordered coffee, opened his phone. Not the newspaper stool this time, one closer to the middle. She had noticed. Marco arrived 10 minutes later and settled himself 2 stools down and started his usual routine, warm and loud and blissfully unaware that there was anything wrong with the air in the room. "Hey, Sophia, you look amazing today. Has anyone told you that?" She kept her expression pleasant. "Thank you, Marco." "I'm serious. That new hairstyle, very good." He pointed at her. "I keep telling you you should let me take you to dinner. Somewhere nice. Come on, one dinner." She opened her mouth to give the standard, polite deflection she had been giving him for months. She did not get to deliver it. From 2 stools down came a sound, very quiet, very controlled. A coffee cup being set down on a counter with precisely 4% more force than was strictly necessary. She looked. Lorenzo had not moved. He was still looking at his phone, but every line of him had changed. The set of his jaw, the tension across his shoulders under the expensive shirt. His thumb was completely still over the screen, which meant he had stopped reading. Marco noticed none of this. Marco was still smiling at Sophia. Sophia was looking at Lorenzo. Lorenzo looked up. He looked at Marco first, one flat, sweeping look that Sophia suspected reduced people to their most basic components, and then he looked at Sophia. His expression was entirely controlled, and also completely transparent to anyone paying attention. She was paying attention. She felt a warmth travel straight through the center of her that she had absolutely no business feeling. She turned back to Marco. "I appreciate it, Marco, but I'm seeing someone." It was the first time she had said it. She had not planned to say it. Lorenzo's coffee cup was still on the counter. She could feel his attention on her like a physical thing. She did not look at him again. Marco accepted the news with the good nature of someone who had been expecting it eventually. "Good for you," he said cheerfully. "Lucky guy." He moved on, ordered his usual, asked about the weather. When she finally looked back down the counter, Lorenzo was watching her. She lifted her chin. He said nothing. But something had shifted in his eyes, something that pulled tight and warm and certain, and she felt it across the counter like he had reached out and taken her hand. She felt it for the rest of the shift. That night, walking home, her phone buzzed. Lorenzo, a text which was unusual, he almost always called. It said, "Was that true?" She stood on the sidewalk in the dark, with the phone in her hand. She typed back, "What do you think?" She watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice. Then, "I think you've been in my mother's kitchen every Saturday for 6 weeks, and you haven't run yet." She looked at the screen for a long time. Then she typed, "Good night, Lorenzo." She went inside. She sat on the edge of her bed and smiled at the ceiling in the dark. The good moments were always the ones that made the bad ones hurt more. 2 weeks later, everything broke. It started with a man named Caruso. Piero Caruso, who was, Sophia learned only afterward, a rival with a very old grudge and a very short temper, and the particular kind of recklessness that came from having enough power to believe consequences didn't apply. He had been watching the Ricci family for months, looking for a weakness. He found Sophia. She didn't know any of this when she left the diner on a Wednesday afternoon. She only knew that the black car appeared at the wrong time, pulling to the curb 2 blocks from her apartment, and the men inside it were not Lorenzo's. She knew they were not Lorenzo's, because Lorenzo's men never grabbed arms. It happened fast. Her phone was in her pocket. She had 1 second before it was taken. In that 1 second, she thought of Adriana. She thought of the kitchen. She thought of the way Lorenzo looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Then there was nothing but the inside of the car and moving. Lorenzo got the call from his man on Sophia's block, 17 minutes after she disappeared. He was in a meeting. He left the meeting. He left the room, the building, and whatever composure he had been maintaining for weeks in the measured and deliberate dance of not pushing too fast and not frightening her. He left all of it in that conference room. What happened next, he would not speak of in detail for a long time. What was documented was a phone call to 3 people, then 12, then 40. What was documented was that the Ricci network moved with the particular speed of an organization that had been built specifically for moments when the world required all of its teeth at once. What was not documented was Lorenzo's face. His second, a man named Dario who had known him since they were boys and who was not easily shaken, would tell someone later that he had never seen Lorenzo like that. Not during the court cases. Not during the war with the Napoli syndicate. Not during the night his father died. He was not loud. He was not aggressive. He was the stillest Dario had ever seen him. He said, "Find her," in a voice that had no edges left, just depth. And then he said, "No one touches her, not one mark, and I want them breathing when I arrive." Sophia was held in a building on the east side for 3 hours. It was not pleasant, but Caruso's men seemed genuinely uncertain about what to do with her, which suggested Caruso had not thought the plan past its first step. She was frightened. She kept her back to the wall and she kept breathing and she thought very deliberately about things that were grounding. Her mother's voice. Adriana's hands rolling pasta. The sound of Lorenzo's voice in his own kitchen, with the armor completely gone. She was still thinking about that when the door came off its hinges. It did not take long after that. Lorenzo found her in the second room. She was standing in the corner, both arms wrapped around herself, and she was holding together through sheer stubbornness. And when she saw him, she felt the stubbornness give out entirely. He crossed the room in 4 steps. He did not say anything. He put his arms around her and she pressed her face against the front of his shirt and shook, just for a moment, just a small controlled collapse before she pulled herself back together. His arms were very steady. His voice when he finally spoke was rough at the edges in a way it never was. "You're all right," he said. "I have you." She pulled back far enough to look at his face. He looked like a man who had traveled through something he would not easily name. She said, "You came." He looked at her. Something moved in his expression that was entirely unguarded for the first time since she had known him. "I will always come," he said. "Sophia." She looked at him. The room was loud with his people moving, with radios, with the efficient, terrible language of what he was, what his world was. And in the middle of all of it, he was looking at her like she was the only fixed point. She put her hand on his face without thinking, curved her palm against his jaw, felt him go absolutely still. He turned his face into her hand, just slightly, just enough. She felt the breath leave her entirely. Later in the car, she sat beside him in the quiet. The city moved outside the windows. His hand was on hers on the seat between them, not intertwined, just present, the warmth of his palm over her knuckles. She said, eventually, "Your world is very dangerous." "Yes," he said. She said, "I knew that." He was quiet. She said, "It doesn't change the kitchen." He looked at her. She looked at the city. "It doesn't change any of it," she said. "I need you to know that." He tightened his hand over hers. He didn't speak, but she felt the change in him, something that had been held in careful suspension releasing slowly, like a long breath finally let go. That night, she stayed at the Ricci house. Adriana said nothing when they arrived. She looked at Sophia's face and Lorenzo's face and simply took Sophia's hands and held them for a moment. Then she went to make tea. Lorenzo showed her to a room on the second floor. High ceilings, heavy curtains, the smell of old wood and clean linen. He stood in the doorway. He looked like he wanted to say something and was finding the right way in. Sophia looked at him across the room. She said, "You can stay, just to talk." He sat on the edge of the chair by the window. She sat on the end of the bed. The lamp made everything amber. He told her about Caruso. He told her about the history, the old grudge, how it had started. He told her more than she expected him to, and she understood that this was a kind of trust, the kind he had not given many people. She told him she wasn't afraid of the truth, that she had always rather have the difficult true thing than the comfortable false one. He looked at her. He said, "I know, that's one of the things. One of the things. One of the things about you that I cannot look away from." The room was very quiet. She said, "Lorenzo." He said, "I know, too much." She said no. He looked at her. She said, "Not too much." He crossed the room slowly. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back. He said, very quietly, "I need to know what you want." She reached up and took his hand the way she had touched his face in that room, without calculation, without the careful hesitation she had been maintaining for weeks. She said, "You." The rest of that night belonged only to them, to the amber light and the old house, and the trust that had been built one quiet action at a time. No walls, no armor, just the truth of two people who had been circling each other for weeks and had finally arrived. The morning came soft and gray. Sophia woke early and lay still in the quiet room, and felt the particular terror that follows the night when everything you wanted arrived, and your entire body decided now was the perfect time to panic about losing it. She had been here before. Not here exactly, but in this place. The place where you had let someone past the wall and the wall closed behind you, and suddenly you were standing in an open field with no cover. She thought about his life, his world, the enemies and the power and the history. She thought about Caruso and the men in the car and the particular look on Lorenzo's face when he arrived, the one that had no controlled edges left. She thought about what it would mean to be loved by a man like that, the weight of it, the exposure. She got up before he woke. She dressed quietly. She was down the stairs and across the entrance hall before she had let herself think the words she was thinking. Running. She was running, again. She got as far as the street. The morning was cold. She stood on the pavement outside the Ricci house with her arms crossed and her breath visible and the full weight of what she was doing sitting on her chest. And then she heard the door. Lorenzo came out without a jacket, which meant he had moved quickly. He came down the steps and stopped on the pavement 3 feet from her. He looked at her face. He said, quietly, "Sophia." She said, "I can't be in a world that gets people taken off the street." He said, "I know." She looked at him. He didn't argue. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He just held the look steady. She said, "I don't know how to do this." He said, "I'm going to tell you something true. You can decide what to do with it." She waited. He said, "Caruso is handled. He will not be a problem again. And I am restructuring certain things, not because of last night, but because I started restructuring them 3 weeks after I met you, because I knew what I wanted and I wanted to be able to offer it to you without apology." She stared at him. He said, "I don't expect you to step into my world as it was. I'm building a version of it that you can stand in. That's not something I say lightly, and it's not something I've ever said before." She felt the air move out of her. He said, "You helped a woman in the rain. You didn't ask what her name was before you helped her. You gave me back an envelope and told me kindness wasn't for sale." He paused. "Sophia, I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who wanted things from me. You are the first person I have ever met who wanted nothing. And I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you want for nothing either." She pressed her fingers to her mouth. He stepped forward. He took both of her hands. He looked at her with the particular intensity that she had stopped trying to resist several weeks ago. He said, "Stay." She looked at him. The cold morning. His hands warm around hers. The house behind them with the lemon tree inside and Adriana who had seen all of it coming long before either of them. She said, "Your mother set this up." Something moved in his expression. Soft and real and completely undefended. He said, "She said you were someone I should meet." He paused. She was right. Sophia laughed. It came out a little broken, a little real. She said, "Fine." He pulled her in. She pressed her face against his chest and felt his arms close around her and felt the terrible open field feeling shift into something else. Something warmer. Something that felt like a door instead of an exposure. He held her in the cold morning on the pavement outside his mother's house for a long time. Neither of them moved. 6 months later, Adriana made panzanella for a table full of people Sophia now knew by name. The lemon tree had been moved to the garden for the summer. The kitchen smelled like always, garlic and bread and warmth. Lorenzo came up behind Sophia, where she was standing at the counter, and put his hand against her waist and said something quiet against her hair that made her turn and look at him. He was holding a ring in his other hand. Not down on one knee in front of everyone. Just quiet, just between them, the way he had always done things, with care and without performance. He said, "I am not the easiest man. My world is not the simplest world. But you are the only fixed point in it, and I cannot think of a single day going forward that I want to exist without you in it." He looked at her. "Sophia, will you?" She looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She looked at the kitchen that had become, over 6 months, more home than anywhere she had ever lived. She said yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. He held her hand between both of his for a moment. He pressed his lips to her knuckles. Adriana came around the corner and looked at both of them with an expression of complete and total satisfaction. "I told you," she said to nobody in particular. The wedding was small by Ricci standards, which meant exactly 40 people and no photographers who hadn't been personally vetted. And Adriana cried through the entire ceremony and did not apologize for a moment of it. Sophia wore cream. Lorenzo stood at the end of the aisle and watched her walk toward him with an expression that she now knew how to read completely. The one he only showed her, the one with no armor in it at all. He took her hand when she reached him and held it the way he had held it on that cold pavement 6 months ago, like it was something worth keeping very carefully. They said the words. Afterwards, late at night, when the house was quiet and the garden lights glowed soft through the window, Sophia sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and her hand on the curve of her stomach, which was only barely there yet, just the beginning of something, just the first soft proof of what they were building. Lorenzo came in and saw her, and stopped in the doorway. He looked at her hand on her stomach. He looked at her face. He came across the kitchen and sat beside her and put his hand over hers, gentle, certain. She looked at him. She said, "We're going to need a bigger kitchen." He laughed, quiet and real and completely unguarded. He kissed her hair. He kept his hand over hers. Outside, the city moved. Inside, the lemon tree grew in its clay pot by the door. And the girl who had helped a lost woman in the rain, the girl who had refused an envelope and walked 4 blocks in the cold, the girl who had been nobody according to the city and everything according to one man who knew how to look. She sat in her kitchen with her husband and her life, and understood at last that the best things had never announced themselves. They had simply arrived, quietly, in the rain. And that, besties, is Mafia Home Tale. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you in the next story.